Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Creator, the fourth film from Gareth Edwards. I think this is a very visually impressive movie, and I think most people, when they talk about pluses of this film, it is the visuals and how good he is in making special effects in this, and how good he is in making them work, and how impressive a lot of this works visually. Story-wise, it's just not there, which is a shame because a lot of the visual filmmaking and the special effects is so good you sort of almost want it to be better while you're watching it, even if it's very evident that this guy's not so much a storyteller as he is a really good stylist in terms of blockbuster filmmaking, probably one of the better directed blockbusters in a time when we're using kind of a lot more blatant CG and stuff like that. On a technical level, this is very impressively directed, especially because it only costs about 80 million and it looks like it costs over 200 million. So good for him. I don't think this will make any money either way, but I still think it's impressive nonetheless. And I followed Gareth Edwards since I saw Monsters and reviewed that, and I've reviewed all his movies. And it's interesting to see one that's more like his first film, and his first original one since then. And, it stinks because you're going to have to bring up all the Rogue One stuff when you talk about this, because it's like, I feel like the storytelling is the weakest part, and that was the thing he needed someone to come in for. But I will say, and I'll give him credit forever for this, is the more I've read about the Rogue One thing, the more, to my understanding, he understood that film wasn't working and worked with the studio and worked with Tony Gilroy. He was not like fired or wasn't kicked out of the editing room. He stayed and made sure his film worked. And I still find that commendable. I don't think he should get any grief for that. However, at the same time, I don't know what this film is doing story-wise. And it almost has, again, I feel like this, with a lot of films, it has too many things going on. But it does sort of work with them, but I think the problem isn't so much having too many ideas. That's honestly something I think the film portrays and clearly explains its backstory and stuff, and there's a lot of that. It's just this is essentially a Lone Wolf and Cub sort of thing, or Eddie Murphy's Golden Child or something. The problem is I don't really care about these characters, and this film definitely is hoping I do that, but he's such a technical and a good technical director. He makes it in a way that seems logical, seems to make sense. I know this is almost a pro AI movie in certain ways, but it doesn't have the kind of human elements to really break out and make me sort of fall in love with this movie. I more just love that I got to see it in the big screen and it looked all pretty, but I don't love it because it told a story to me and that I have a connection to these characters. This does take place in the future in I forget where we were, 2060? No, I think we end up in 2065 or 2070 by the end. It's kind of confusing. I think it's 2055, then a decade after that, and then 5 years after that. It's 2070, right? Anyway, this film takes place in 2070 after a lot of events happened. It's an alternate Earth, basically alternate history, where AI and technology kind of started earlier, helping humans and helping them make drinks and doing various things, and started taking over more and more industries, where it eventually took over national security and decided almost directly right after it started to set off a nuclear bomb in Los Angeles. And then America decided, and most of the world decided, to start a war with AI, stopping it throughout the world. But the country of New Asia has embraced AI and is keep developing AI, and they need to sort of stop it. As John David Washington's character of Taylor is at first undercover with this woman who is pregnant to find this guy Namada, or a scientist who makes a lot of AI. She finds out he's an agent and all that, and then 5 years after all that stuff, he is sent to kind of this research facility because they know he knows the layout, and you kind of either get this weapon that will stop and change the war, because the US has this thing called Nomad that goes around the world and basically just bombs shit from space, which is kind of neat. As a design, as a totalitarian metaphor, it works really well. But as a cool spaceship, it is cool too. He has to kind of figure out this weapon because they believe this weapon could stop Nomad and giving the US and humanity an edge in this war. And he finds the weapon, and it's a little kid, and he's kind of morally deciding what to do with this little kid, and the little kid knows where his wife is because he thinks his wife is working at this facility. And this sounds way more complicated now I'm saying it all. And him and this little kid are on this journey so he can find his wife, and morally figuring out what to do with this little kid who could be kind of a game changer for humanity and AI relations, as they realize the little kid is not just a symbiote or all this stuff. Sorry, she can actually grow and kind of be a being while also being an AI, which would change everything and can do things with its mind. John David Washington's character of Taylor has to figure out what to do and what is the right moral thing to do with this actual being who is AI, and the kind of moral conundrum of it. One thing about this film visually is there was an actual thing with Star Wars that is actually highly influential. That I don't know if people talk about as much now, but the idea of like that spaceships could be like dirty and worn. Certainly there's probably some heavy metal magazines and other things that did that before Star Wars did, but Star Wars popularized it particularly with cinema. And I know, in fact, because Ridley Scott talks about it when he made Alien, that was something why he did that with Alien, and also why he did that in Blade Runner, because he liked that aesthetic, the idea that things in space could be dirty and grimy and things like that, and he got that from Star Wars. I've seen him say it in so many interviews, and that's sort of what they're doing here. Like a worn, it's like technology that's all around, but it feels worn and used, and you can see the scrapes and the marks on it and the dirt. And that's what Gareth Edwards did. I mean, honestly, while I was watching, I was like, man, it'd be cool if this guy directed a Star Wars movie. He'd be really good at that. Because visually, he would. I mean, you know, and Rogue One isn't a bad movie or anything, but visually, he does that very, very well. The idea of technology like this. And even like when the Americans have more clean piece of technology, or there is a more clean piece of technology, there's a point to it. Like the dirt and the grime is telling you certain storytelling things, which is interesting. But if you love that aesthetic of like the original trilogy of Star Wars movies or Alien or something like that, and you want to see just a visually want to see a movie like that, this is a movie for you. And I am definitely one of those people who likes that. And visually, I love this film. It was shot actually by two different DPs. Greg Fraser, who did Dune and The Batman, and Oren Soffer. Gareth Edwards is really good with DPs, and having two different ones who are very great worked really well, and him compositing in his visual effects later. They'd shoot on location, and then we put the visual effects in later. He's a real master of it, particularly the Nomad thing, which looks amazing. But I think the story of this should be better, and I think morally it gets into, is a being that has sentience still something that should be respected? Isn't it still life if it's not made organically but made by AI, made by technology? Is that not still life itself, regardless of what it's made from? That's an interesting debate that this film, it's basically a check that this film can't cash. They want to bring it up, and they bring it up, but it's like kind of like when people say like you know, I just wanted to start the conversation, but you know they don't really where that conversation is going to lead. They like say it in a way that's like, I just wanted to start a conversation. You're like, okay. I mean, you can start any conversation, but like you have to have like a point of bringing up to someone. And I think he does, but it doesn't, like, I think he believes certain things, but I don't think it really makes a good enough of an argument. It kind of just like, it feels a little like very pro AI in an interesting moralistic way, which I don't disagree with what he's saying about it, but it does feel weird the time of this being released with the strikes and everything being so sort of anti-AI. But in a sense, the AI they're fighting against isn't the AI that this movie is talking about. So they're sort of separate issues, because like the AI people use to make like photos and like stupid dumb AI scripts and stuff like that, not really AI, they're just tuned algorithms and stuff like that. So the idea of this AI and that AI being compared is a bit of a joke in itself. But John David Washington, I do feel like with this role, it feels very much like what he had to do in Tenet, where he's playing the protagonist. This, it feels like he's playing the protagonist in insert sci-fi movie here. He tries to make it work. It doesn't, but I don't blame him. I think it's like direction-wise, it felt like he was trying his best, and there isn't much to work with when all these different things to go on. So I think, I mean, I don't know. Part of me thinks like if Gosling had this, would he be able to do it? If this actor had it, I was like, I think the filmmaking is so much more about like almost the story of it, and like the idea of like this story has this sort of construction, but like no real almost love for these characters, something like that, that it really doesn't sing in that way. So it did feel like a very paint by numbers plot that made it just kind of just led it to point A to point B to point A to point B like it's supposed to. It's like Mando and Grogu, Lone Wolf and Cub. Here we go. Here's how we're doing this. This is what we're supposed to do. But it felt like those aren't scenes you necessarily like. You need to have more looseness to it, which is doesn't, you know, Lucas and all those Ridley Scott and all the greats. I know he's influenced by Akira and stuff. Many of those films were just as interested in the experience than just like trying to recapture these genres. And it feels like one of the things, like Gareth Edwards is not a filmmaker as like a huge array of influences or something, but at the same time, I do think he uses those basic influences very well, but he just doesn't have the heart and the soul to them. Like you can tell he's influenced by them, and technically he is a great director, but not, I think, emotionally. Also, I think Madeline Yoles, who plays the kind of the weapon, that little girl is amazing. She's a great actress. She has a presence to her. This film almost like I wish the structure of her scenes had more to them, because I feel like with the right screenplay she could have really popped in this. You know, it like she understands her character really really well in a film that like feels a little more interested in kind of the world itself than like making you care about these two people. It feels like she like gets that to work regardless of the crappy storytelling with those characters. I do think it's like there's a lot of people who would like this aesthetic, and I can see people in 10, 20 years playing this as revival things and stuff. But it's sort of like Outland with Sean Connery, or one of those like the forgotten, like better Star Wars kind of sci-fi ripoffs of the time. And certain people like me will go and watch them. But I think there's something to be said about like why, you know, you have these off-brand ones and you have the peak ones of that period. And this feels like a very good off-brand sci-fi film that probably in 5 years people will be like, what's the creator and stuff like that. And I think that's a bit of a shame. I do like how he's good at filmmaking and shrinking costs, and he did that with Monster. He filmed this in a similar way. I do find sometimes him as a storyteller, particularly like Godzilla. When I first saw his Godzilla, I liked it. When I saw it again, it didn't hold up as well. And I feel like a lot of his films, Rogue One I've seen again, that holds up, and Monsters I know is held up. I do think like maybe the reason him and Tony Gilroy works together so well is one can be more the visual storyteller, one can be the more, you know, write the screenplay and stuff like that. And I think that that's something I think he really needed. But it's like a really original science fiction story. It's very interesting. I would compare this to Elysium in that it's a director coming off of a Big Things follow-up. I would say, unlike Elysium, I think this is a watchable movie that I'd want to see again. Elysium I didn't like. I think this is far more interesting and works in certain regards. You know, it's just that like you've seen this story a million times before. How visually impressive this is, I wish the story was there. I wish the story was matching it. It just doesn't feel like, it feels like he's putting in these moments because he knows he has to, because that's how the story should, you know, work and read certain things. And it feels like a director, you're watching them eat their peas and carrots at the times when they have to deal with the actual, you know, protagonist and main character, and that's like honestly not a good sign. But I wish this film would get more respect, you know, Oscar-wise and things like that, because of the visual effects, because he saved so much money on it, which I think is really saying something, but also because this is visually very great. I know there's certain aspects of it because this takes place in New Asia and certain like Asian elements to this that some people have called racist and things like that. I can't fully get into that because I don't seem to understand. I know like certain mentioning or alluding to things in the Vietnam War. I don't think I don't know, I didn't really see that while I was watching it, but it did seem like a little like, is this all New Asia is in these places? But I guess that's where the labs are and stuff. So like some of it can be explained, but I don't also understand a lot of the things people are really mad about with that. I think it's trying to say a lot and do a lot of things. But ultimately, like, what I'll remember about this is Gareth Edwards' special effects and how cool it looks, how it looks like, movies I like and that kind of cool aesthetic. But I'm not thinking about, when you watch The Force Awakens, you're not being like, oh man, the visuals of the Millennium Falcon. You're like, Han Solo came back, and there's Oscar Isaacs, and there's Adam Driver. You're thinking of these characters. And I think someone who had directed a Star Wars film, had done a Godzilla movie, done this and that, want to understand that, like, we need a character to sort of connect to. And I think, like, John David Washington character, Gareth Edwards doesn't seem to want to make you fall in love with him as much as he wants you to see his cool special effects. So if you've seen The Creator and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.